afternoon, everyone. I suppose I'm standing here at the very wrong time. I am hungry, to say the least, and we are running late. So, yeah. But I'll keep it as crisp as I can. This is a conversation that I just wanted to layer in, and you see the who's who of the industry out here from a finance domain, so I'm not here necessarily talking through the house of what you need to look at. I would rather imagine every one of you are well conversant in terms of cost management, so that's not something that I want to impress on to this community at least. But what I want to certainly talk about is to bring in a flavor of what I have gone through over the last 3-4 years in terms of the priorities that we have seen, I have seen, where the role of CFOs have become a lot more, non-conventional, so to say, and how it can effectively be a more execution focused and a lot more in terms of value creation. Now, as I said, there is who's who in this, and I've met a lot of my colleagues and counterparts in organizations that are run within the gamut of finance. So I'll be a bit more crisp. I always find the CFOs to be in the cusp of either taking a controllership mindset at one end of the spectrum. And at the other end of the spectrum, I see them as conduits to growth and strategy, and more so from an execution mindset standpoint. So I have transversed my life between CFOs who have been a lot more controlling and CFOs who have been a lot more enterprising. And I think and I believe as the industry progresses, I see a lot more of focus for the CFOs to become, I would say, chief operating officers of an organization or chief executive officers of an organization. And that I see a lot more happening nowadays. And I would say, and that is because of happening on many areas, right? So the idea was to talk about how do you leverage costs to enhance growth within the organization. I believe it has to do beyond naturally cutting costs. That's something that's pretty obvious, that there are agencies and aspects that are available with respect to optimization that is possible through cutting costs. But how do you optimize the spend to support growth is something that has to keep in mind the business priorities as you look at it. You can take a machete and start cutting costs, but I would say you have to have a method with respect to when you think about spend management and cost management. Zero base is given. I would rather be working on benchmarks within the organization in terms of cost management, and there is a certain operating leverage that is possible. But I want to, at least what we have found in our organization is, in a growth mindset organization, Omega Healthcare as an organization went from 10,000 people 3 years back to 30,000 people today. That had resulted from some of the thinking that we had gone through over the last 3 years, wherein while cost management was a critical aspect, we had a growth fund, which we had created within the organization. We had a fund that kind of incentivized people to experiment within the organization, running proof of concepts with existing clients, and the level of innovation culture that one has to aspire to in an organization, more so driven through while there is a growth mentality, nevertheless, and you have to capitalize on it, there needs to be the culture of innovation, culture of a mindset difference, just because what I've found is finance generally has a machete that they take with respect to cost optimization, which if converted into something a lot more value creating, I believe there's a long way to go with respect to that. So just from a mindset standpoint, it's not as about cutting costs as much as it is to support growth. And This is something that I've always spoken about. Finance as an organization has to grow beyond the three C's, which is cost, control, and compliance. You saw the gentleman who spoke before me, he speaks about how systems can effectively be looking into cost control and compliance. So if, as an organization, from a finance fraternity standpoint, we are able to leverage technology, which is easy said than done, I'm sure that most of what he spoke about are aspirational in nature for some of us, right? We have all had these tools that we have been trying to, appropriately put in place, but some of them are absolute reality. If we are able to focus on making sure that some of these elements, which are core to our, any organization from a finance standpoint, going beyond cost control and compliance can only happen when you let something else manage cost control and compliance. And in our mind, it was an ERP, it was a setup that we had invested a long time on. But to make it work needs a mindset which has to focus on making sure that the level of investments that you're putting in from a money standpoint also has to come from the effort that the team puts in, from not just finance, but an organizational setup. But that kind of freezes your time, right? Most of my time initially was spent more on the controlling aspects, either in terms of budgetary controls or in terms of compliance management. And I believe once you put in the right controls and tools in place, that you will be in a position to start focusing as an organization, by I'm talking about finance, into investments, enablement, and growth. And when I'm talking about investment, enablement, and growth, it's about how do you think about innovation councils at a board level, how do you look at investment partnerships from some of these innovations, and if that is driven through a finance mindset, that also creates a fair amount of value to the organization, especially with a, I come in from a private equity board, and the mindset of a private equity is very different from, I would say, a public company. The mindset is in terms of how do you invest in terms of growth to get X more from the investments that you're making, and that requires a fair amount of experimentation. Mindset of experimentation a lot will depend on how you do not focus on some of the I would say, controlling elements of it, but largely put in a framework where the innovation takes care of some of the investments that you're doing in from an ROI standpoint. Not all costs can go through an ROI mindset, and that's something that we need to put in place. As CFOs, I would say the three focus areas that I have found myself largely focusing on over the last 3 years has been: one, agility. Agility is, in my mind, a lot relative to what's happening in the market, what's happening in the industry, what's happening in competition, what's happening from a supply side standpoint, and how best do you use crisis as an opportunity. I would say agility in terms of some of the existential issues that has to be managed on the here and now basis. That includes IT security, cyber security, when it comes to scale and consolidation, when it comes to employee safety, future of work, the way you engage with your employees, the diversity angle of it, the ESG angle of it. All of those requires a here and now solution for it, which is, in my mind, largely driven through, if driven through a finance organization, has a lot more objective way of organizing some of these outcomes for that matter. A sense of urgency in an agile environment is one area that I have found myself spend a lot of time on. Second that I want to talk about in a growth mindset organization is how aggressive you are. At least from an Omega standpoint, we believe we are consolidators of choice from the healthcare market, and the way we looked at that aspect was largely through organic growth as well as inorganic. We had made 4 large acquisitions over the last 2 years, I would say. And finance has a critical role which has to play in terms of influencing the choice and our ability, and the ability to fund for such investments for that matter. And aggression in a market like this is to do with our ability to grow and consolidate. And that is possible when you go back, right, in terms of making sure that you have the appropriate costs, an optimization of costs that is possible, that can be, leading into funding some of these investments for that matter. So And the third element, of course, is automation and digitization. We don't have to talk about it. You all are, it's an existential issue. It's not a conversation of ROIs anymore when we are talking about technology. I think it's more existential than not. But of course, you do have to have some outcomes in mind when you're talking about automation, when you're talking about digitization. There's a whole new world that is out there when we are talking about healthcare as an industry. And I do come from that industry to think about how automation is becoming front and center in terms of patient experience. And there's a separate conversation that we need to have in all. But what I want to submit as part of this, as I said, this is not a forum where I can necessarily talk about specifics and be very objective about. But what I have found in the experience that I've had from managing operations and finance is that there is a value to execution, and CFOs and the finance organization, I feel, has had the the opportunity for being the transformation agents within the organization, and that is made a reality through the vision that is created through working with the business teams, for that matter, as business enablers and business partners. I believe a sense of continuous experimentation is, as a mindset, is going to be critical. And continuous learning, of course, is important, but to also look at it on a progressive basis. Long gone are the 5-year plans. I would say it's more a 2 to 3 year kind of a mindset that one needs to bring in. But what I want to leave this, this forum is with the thought that as finance fraternity, I think we are way past the mindset of controllership. I think it's more into making sure that we form an organization that is a lot more growth enabled, and that as a mindset is quite possible only and only when you are going out of transactions. And when, and what helps you in going out of transactions with respect to the 3 C's that we spoke about is the way you start engaging with your enterprise in terms of democratizing information. So when I talk about democratization of information, I mean to make sure that the systems are capable enough for you to not only close but also to report out, and also take care of the basics of cost control and compliance, so you can largely start focusing on investment growth and enablement. Now, that is all I had. As I said, this is just a gist of experiences that I have gone through over the last 3 to 4 years in terms of how to and how not to. And how not to is in my mind, is to largely focus on the transactional elements, because as part of finance and the finance fraternity and the finance leadership and the finance mindset, I believe we have a better chance to lead industry-leading growth for any organization, for that matter. So if you can effectively run your priorities with your leadership team out there. So I just want to submit those as some initial thoughts to all of you. Not want to be prescriptive at all in this, and would love to hear your comments and observations there. Thanks a lot, team.